Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour at 5:30, Bradley Devlin is going to join us from the American Conservative. He's a great American. We're going to talk about Speaker Mike Johnson and the House Republican Party, what's on the agenda right now. And there's a lot. There's a lot. Everything from what other countries are we spending money on? Are we going to actually secure our border? When do those articles of impeachment for Alejandro Mayorkas start moving to the United States Senate? All they have to do is walk them down the hallway. Why is it taking so long? And will they continue to spy on Americans without a warrant? The House Republicans are equipped to stop it. Will they? Bradley Devlin joins us ahead. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The talk of the town today, at least on the right, is a great piece, not a surprising piece. It's only surprising insofar as the person who's telling it, you might not expect to be the guy to share it, but there's a man by the name of Uri Berliner, and he's writing today for a publication called The Free Press, run by a woman called Barry Weiss. And his headline on his essay, published this morning, is, "I've been at NPR for 25 years. Here is how we lost America's trust." Now, without going any further, I think you know the answer to how NPR, to the extent that it had the trust of the American public, lost it. Lost it. It is rock bottom. People do not trust what our friend Chris Plant calls national panhandler radio. They don't trust them. NPR takes a tremendous amount of federal money, while I'm on that issue, and government money broadly. They like to conceal it. They pretend like they don't take that much. Oh, it's only a small portion of our budget, they'll say, whenever this issue comes up. And then you'll say, okay, well, then you won't mind if we take it away, will you? Oh, no, you can't take it away. It's essential. Well, wait a second. You just told me it was a very small portion of your budget. The reality is that they're playing word games with you. NPR's got member stations all across the country who themselves take massive amounts of government money and then they turn around and give it to this organization that purports to be a news organization called NPR. So it gets laundered to them, but fundamentally, so much of the money is actually government cash, taken from taxpayers and given to NPR. So here you have a guy who's been working for 25 years at NPR at the national level. He is the senior editor on the business desk, and he still works there to this day. This is not a guy who left NPR recently. He works there right now. And he is so beside himself by what he is seeing internally at this very late date. This has been going on for years, but here he is in 2024 saying, this is crazy. I have to tell you about it. So he says he's the stereotype of an NPR listener. He says he's an EV driving, Wordle playing, tote bag carrying coastal elite. He said the description doesn't precisely describe him, but it's close. He was Sarah Lawrence educated. He was raised by a lesbian peace activist mother. He drives a Subaru. And Spotify says that his listening habits most closely resemble people in Berkeley, just to give you a sense of who this guy is. I guarantee you there's a lot of granola in his pantry. He says he fits the NPR mold. He says it's true that NPR has always had a liberal bent, but during most of my tenure here, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk activist or scolding. In recent years, however, that has changed. Today, those who listen to NPR or read its coverage online find something different, the distilled worldview of a very small segment of the U.S. population. If you're conservative, you will read this and you will say, duh, it's always been this way. But, he says, it hasn't. For decades, since its founding in 1970, a wide swath of America tuned into NPR for reliable journalism and gorgeous audio pieces, with birds singing in the Amazon. Millions came to us for conversations that exposed us to voices around the country and the world radically different from our own, engaging precisely because they were unguarded and unpredictable. No image generated more pride within NPR than the farmer listening to Morning Edition from his or her tractor at sunrise. He said back in 2011, although NPR's audience tilted a bit to the left, it still bore a resemblance to America at large. According to a survey, 26% of listeners described themselves as conservative, 23% middle of the road, 37% liberal. This was in 2011 now, 13 years ago. By 2023, last year, the picture was completely different. Only 11% would describe themselves as very or somewhat conservative. 21% middle of the road, 67% of listeners said that they were very or somewhat liberal. They weren't just losing conservatives. We were losing moderates and traditional liberals, he says. That's his way of describing not left-wing lunatics. An open-minded spirit no longer exists within NPR, he says. And now, predictably, we don't have an audience that reflects America. That wouldn't be a problem for an openly polemical news outlet serving a niche audience. But for NPR, which purports to consider all things, they have a show, All Things Considered, it's devastating, both for its journalism and its business models. And now let me jump in. I'll jump into some audio here because he's given an interview to Bari Weiss on this very subject. She sat down with him to talk about the essay today and what he concluded about what's going on in NPR. And you won't be surprised to find out that it was Trump that drove everybody crazy inside of NPR. He writes in the essay, like many unfortunate things, the rise of advocacy took off with Donald Trump. Take a listen to Bari Weiss's conversation with NPR's Uri Berliner today on this subject.
Everyone knew that NPR had a liberal bent. It was like saying these days, like Fox has a conservative bent. That was obvious to anyone. But you argue that it's really gone from having a liberal bent or a liberal shading to really a bias. Here's one thing you write in your essay. You write, for the majority of your time at NPR, despite the liberal bend, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk, activist, or scolding. Uri, when did that start to change? When did the thing that everyone sort of recognized as sort of a liberal bias start to shift into something harder than that, into what you call a knee-jerk, activist, and even scolding quality?
Well, I think it was cumulative. I don't think it was one event. I mean, I think part of it was Trump's election. I think like every newsroom, every legacy media newsroom, we were shocked, disturbed, distraught, really troubled. We assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win.
You wouldn't believe the number of stories I've heard of legacy newsrooms where the newsroom was crying about the outcome of the 2016 election. Actually, you would believe it probably, given the tenor of all the news coverage. But all over the place, people freaking out. CNN, people freaking out that Donald Trump won the 2016 election. I was at Trump's victory party in Manhattan. We were at the Midtown Hilton, where he held the victory party in 2016, and I was right next to of course, I was a member of the media. I was there as a reporter. And the media filing center was right there where everybody was rushing off to their laptops to write their stories for the evening. All of these reporters had pre-written that Hillary Clinton was going to win. That was the story they had written. They just needed to plug in the numbers and then hit publish. Or presumably send it off to their editors. That's the way it used to be, at least. That's all they needed to do. It was going to be an easy night. Hillary wins. Trump loses. He sucked. She ran a great campaign. She spent so much more money than him. Here's all the math. Here's what the numbers look like. Here's what, as of publication time, here what the results are. That was not what happened. As you know, Donald Trump wins. They all have to rewrite their stories. They have to quickly come up with narratives. And in the midst of all of this, it wasn't just the work, but more importantly for them, it was the political outcome. Reporters crying, bawling in the media filing center at the Trump victory party. So this was an emotional event for an emotionally unstable industry. And at NPR, it had a deep effect.
And she didn't, and it was really an unsettling experience. But I also think, to me, it revealed that we didn't really understand a lot of what was going on in America, that we were out of touch. But I think also we kind of locked down after a while. I think after a while we started covering Trump in a way that like a lot of legacy news organizations, that we were trying to damage his presidency, to even find anything we could to harm him. And
listen to that. Listen to the intentionality there. He's saying, he's 25 years in the NPR newsroom, and he says, we decided that we would damage his presidency. We would pick stories based on whether or not it would harm him.
I think what we latched on to was Russia collusion, like a lot of news organizations, which was, as I write, sort of catnip, although it was just rumors and a lot of it based on pretty shoddy documents or evidence. It wasn't really solid, but I think it was compelling. And for us, I think a lot of
He means compelling as a political weapon.
Newspapers, use documents or anonymous sources. We really latched on to Adam Schiff. He was like our muse to the Trump collusion story. We had him on constantly, a lot. I think I counted 25 times. And in most of those conversations, he sort of alluded to evidence he may have had or sort of teased out, Russia, he was colluding or the campaign was colluding with Russia. And then the Mueller report came out and no collusion. And, I think we sort of learned the story kind of disappeared. But to me, that was like a time for what went wrong? Why did we miss this? Despite our feelings about Trump, this is a story we should have sort of treated differently.
Right. You'd undergo a course correction. You failed in gathering the facts and disseminating them to the public. So you figure out how you could do it better in the future if that was the mission of your organization. More in a second. But to the phones we go. Sam is calling in from Rockville, line 2. Sam, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Hi.
Hi, Sam.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
I can say that he's absolutely right. I'm I am employed by NPR in a technical aspect, so I get to see the actual behind-the-scenes stuff that's not broadcast on the air. And I can tell you that being a conservative there, it's pretty lonely.
Sam, I don't want you to tell me how long specifically you've worked there, but would you say a long time?
Comparable to Uri, yes.
And in that time frame, have you seen it change?
Yes.
And go ahead.
Yes.
Describe how. How has it changed?
Everything is now to the far left. There's everything is climate change, trans, global warming. And all within the same interview. Basically, it doesn't matter what the subject matter is. They always have to circle back and what are the aspects of these other woke ideas? How does that pertain to the story? When it doesn't, and it's also reflected by the people that work there, which are just right out of college. Everybody thinks the same. There is no difference in opinion. It's all one-sided, and they talk about all this. We get all this diversity training, and it all goes one direction. The river just flows one direction. And believe me, I've had to put up with this. I've noticed it probably within the last when we moved into the new building is when it really got bad. Like I say, I'm a technician. I hear everything that happens now behind the microphones and what people actually think and how they actually what their actual views are.
So let's say for instance, Sam, that you wanted to express that you don't think men should play women's sports. Would that be a safe view to express in an NPR hallway?
No. That would be very offensive.
Offensive to the point that you would have to be called in to speak with your bosses.
Well, in the first place, I wouldn't, even if I could express it, I wouldn't, because it's been so long that you cannot speak freely about anything. So I just shut up. You can't speak about those things. So you just have to keep it inside.
According to Uri in his essay today, which, by the way, did you have a chance to read this essay, Sam?
No, I heard it teased on Chris Plant, but this is the first I've actually heard of it.
I'd appreciate if you get a chance to take a look at the full essay, and then maybe you give us a call back tomorrow if you're free to do it. I'd love to get your impression of how much this lines up with your experience. But Uri says today that he recognized what you did, which is all of this talk about diversity hasn't led to actually viewpoint diversity at all. In fact, it's a monoculture, and that among the reporters in the newsroom, he said he found 87 registered Democrats working in editorial positions and 0 Republicans in NPR.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's probably 98%, 99% total Democrat.
Sure seems like it. Now, I should also point out, for the sake of fairness, that there are some Republicans in D.C. who will register as Democrats because that's the only way you can vote and actually have any influence in the city. But my guess is at NPR, these are almost entirely true believers, Sam.
No, yes, it's completely one-sided. I've never heard a conservative view, and when there is, they're treated differently. as far as the tone of the questions, and it's more of an attack mode type thing. No follow-up questions, and it's a different environment completely.
Wow.
For a conservative on there. I've heard it. I've recorded stuff. I've heard it. You know, how a conservative is treated versus a more liberal or Democrat, basically. I've heard it.
I believe you, Sam. Sam, thank you for this call. We're going to stay in touch with you if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Good, appreciate the call today. Fascinating stuff. Okay, line 4, Sam, Alexandria. You're on the Vince Colonnese Show. Hello, Sam.
Hey, Vince. Thanks so much for having me on. I just love the show because you're always pushing thought and making us think about things a little deeper. One of the things that I thought about on this is, I don't think that we're too late as a nation to pull pitch up, get out of this dive. But my concern is that we have so many bedrock professions, as this guy alluded to in his interview, that need to take a hard look at their profession, both individually and holistically. And, that starts with the news media and journalists, doctors, lawyers, academics. I think politics are lost. The corporate boardroom, military, Department of State, and sadly, at the very top of the rung, the bedrock of the family. And all of us can impact that individually. And when we're in in our profession, we have to start influencing, or, the profession is lost, and there goes the country.
Yeah. Everyone has to make that cost benefit analysis. You navigate through it. What do you value, and what are you willing to sacrifice to express that? And it's not always an easy decision, but I don't know. It's just like at the end of your life, you're going to look back, you're going to think to yourself, what should I have done? And if you have that perspective now, I think it improves your decision making. I'm not telling anybody how to go, but I'm appreciative of anybody who's willing to step out and go, this is going haywire. If you're the guy who's saying the emperor has no clothes, maybe you can wake everybody up. Sam, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, hold on. Boy, so many great calls coming in. Thank you to this great audience. Coming up, I've got Bradley Devlin joining us from the American Conservative. We'll talk about what the House of Representatives is up to and not up to right now. Speaker Johnson, well, how history thinks about him is at stake this very month. Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. More of your calls coming up. But first, we have to get to the issue of Speaker Mike Johnson. He has a Marjorie Taylor guillotine hanging over his head right now. She's prepared a motion to vacate the chair. She'd like to get rid of this guy, maybe. She's got the threat hanging out there. But why is that? Why would it be worth scrapping this Speaker of the House? For more on that, Bradley Devlin is here. He's a political editor for the American Conservative, and he joins us now. Hello, Bradley. Good to talk to you again, sir.
Hi, Vince. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. So, like I said, Marjorie Taylor Greene has basically issued the threat. She's not ready to carry it out yet. But what are we concerned about right now with Speaker Johnson? What are we on guard for?
I think the number one thing is Ukraine aid. If Mike Johnson decides to negotiate this package of Ukraine aid without any type of border security and bring it to the floor because he's afraid of a discharge petition, then it could be the last straw. Today, MTG had a letter with J.D. Vance to OMB Director Young about how the Biden administration has hidden the figures of real Ukraine aid from the American public. And finally, after nearly a year and a quarter, they are getting some concrete answers or giving some concrete answers over to Congress about it. And so MTG playing a role in that and, having this discharge petition, or not the discharge petition, the motion to vacate in the hopper already means that she is poised, if she is not pleased, to trigger that against Mike Johnson. So Mike Johnson's path forward is don't do anything on Ukraine, right? The Biden administration has another $4 billion of presidential drawdown authority. Don't do anything. Don't just sacrifice yourself on the altar of Ukraine as Mitch McConnell has.
But my impression is the White House very badly wants Ukraine money. Is that right? Like, in other words, this is good leverage if you wanted to use it.
Right. It is good leverage if you wanted to use it, which is why it was so disappointing when Mitch McConnell cut James Lankford off at the knees and said you can't ask for any concrete metric to make border crossings go down and dispense Ukraine aid only if the border conditions improve. Mike Johnson needs to be willing to not bring anything to the floor and say, if you don't meet voters' number one priority, which is fixing the problem at the southern border, you're not going to get Ukraine funding. So you either reveal that you actually don't feel like Ukraine is all that important if you're the Biden administration, or you actually play ball with conservatives. And, the Biden administration may want this money really, really badly, but thus far, they can talk a lot about Ukraine aid, but at the end of the day, Mike Johnson needs to have the nerve to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep pushing for H.R. 2.
So one of the retorts I keep hearing from Republicans as they try and explain why, they might have to pass Ukraine aid without any meaningful fix to the border is like, well, no matter how much money or no matter what laws we have on the books, Biden is just going to refuse to enforce them anyway. So, we may as well just do the thing that we broadly agree to, which is send Ukraine more money. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I just think it's patently ridiculous. The only way in which Mike Johnson would be absolutely forced to consider something on Ukraine is if Republicans decided to join a Democrat started discharge petition. And so these moderate Republicans who join on to that effort, if they do, they would be instantly punished in the ballot box by Republican voters and punished in institutional Washington for doing that, right? You'd get primaried instantly, and you'd be on the outs. So until that happens and there's an appetite for conservatives to join that discharge petition, Mike Johnson should not do anything.
Also, as I think about it, too, it's like there are legal requirements that don't just deal with the executive branch. You also can have nationwide, well, I guess it does in some sense, but nationwide e-verify, where, in other words, you have to follow the law if you're a business owner. You have to verify that the people you're hiring are eligible to be in the United States at all. Why not force e-verify as a condition here? That would be a quick way to start getting this out-of-control system under a lot more control than it is now.
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of E-Verify, Vince, but listen, my office isn't so far away from K Street. I think I could throw a few rocks and hit a few lobbyists walking down in Farragut Square right now who aren't too enthusiastic about E-Verify, and that's kind of the problem. You've seen this problem with the FISA fight going on, too, right now. Right, where Mike Turner gets up there and says, no American citizen has ever been spied on using FISA. Are you kidding me? That's a joke.
A lie.
It's a lie, and it's a joke, and it's because a lot of these Republicans who might dress themselves in America First or MAGA garb are secretly still, neocons who bend over backward for the intel community and who bend over backward for the tech lobby.
Let's talk about this. So I think it was December, right? Last time this came up, and they gave it the old can kick until April. They said, FISA, we're going to have to, we'll temporarily delay a full reauthorization until April because it was contentious back then. And I remember at the time, and I'm not just trying to pick on Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz is the one who stands out to me. He was among the Republicans who you'd think, okay, this is the constitutional law guy. He voted to renew FISA in the Senate, in his capacity in the Senate. But a lot of Republicans did, in both House and Senate. They said, we're going to keep doing this as it exists now. And there's all sorts of rampant warrantless surveillance of Americans that's being done through a surveillance program that's literally designed to spy on foreigners and not American citizens. And this has come up for years, and every time Republicans have kicked the can. We are now approaching the deadline again, which is, a couple days out from it, aren't we, Bradley?
Yeah, we are. We're April 19th, Section 702 is set to expire, and Mike Johnson can either get this deal done, negotiating between, the conservatives who are more concerned about Americans' privacy rights and conservatives who are more concerned about national security, American privacy rights be damned. That dynamic is really well captured by the House Intelligence Committee, who's on the side of the intel agencies, and the House Judiciary Committee led by Jim Jordan. And in this dynamic, you kind of see, I'm old enough to remember when the Patriot Act passed. It's actually good to see the right has an appetite now to defend Americans' privacy rights. But, if Mike Johnson can't manage to get a deal done, namely get warrants attached to this Judiciary Committee bill that the Rules Committee is currently marking up, then he might be forced to pass FISA under suspension of the rules. And then the question remains, well, is anyone ticked off enough about FISA to go to MTG and say, hey, pull that motion to vacate out of the hopper. You've got me and one other person, and we ride at dawn. We're going to vacate Speaker Johnson. I don't know if that were to transpire. I don't know what goes from there. I don't know if Johnson has a chance to return to the speakership and if he'd be saved by Democrats, or we'd be thrown into another week and a half of chaos.
This is a super important moment. This is super important. Do you think that the right, those who care about protecting the privacy rights of American citizens, is going to be able to drum up the attention that this deserves? Obviously, you're giving it attention right now, Bradley. Will there be others?
Well, the reason that it failed partially in December is because of those conservatives objecting. They tried again in February, but the Intel Committee was not happy with some of the provisions in the Judiciary Committee originated bill. They've now taken that bill from Representative Lee to take out some of the red lines and then maybe add by amendment this warrant provision that the Judiciary Committee really wants. Which
it's amazing. By the way, can I just pause on that for a moment? It's just amazing. What they're doing already is unconstitutional. They're surveilling Americans without a warrant, any meaningful due process. And all we're asking for them to do is add a redundancy to the law that says they have to follow the Constitution.
Right. Yeah. And that's just an added layer of absurdity to this whole thing. Turner's been out there trying to sink this. They've leaned on Mike Pompeo for some reason to come in and say this is going to be a fundamental threat to American security, and a bunch of other, kind of shills for the intel agency.
Garbage.
Like, I don't think the right needs to hear anything else from Mike Pompeo, former director of the CIA, about why we need to be spied on still.
If he's rooting on warrantless surveillance, it's garbage.
Right. But Mike Johnson would be in such a difficult position because if this is brought up under suspension, it probably passes. So does the speaker bring it up under suspension and say, I'm not voting for this, but we can't let FISA lapse? I don't know if that's going to satisfy the appetites of conservatives. Now, there has been some people on the Intel Committee that are willing to consider these provisions because of what you just said. This is basically already a requirement under law. We would just be reaffirming it. Nothing else is really going to change. So even their reasoning is, though it's kind of twisted, they could be voting in favor of this bill when it eventually comes to the floor. And so I have hope for FISA reform because of the pressure on Mike Johnson right now. But I am always nervous that the Intel community will kick into high gear, because if you remember in February when we were having this fight last time, all of a sudden from on high, the Intel community said, oh, there's some massive threat, code red. And it turned out that the Russians are considering using nuclear technology in space, which is like, of course, everyone's kind of trying to do that. But they made it seem like for 48 hours that a nuclear war was imminent.
Well, yeah, and also Russia already has capabilities. Russia already has capabilities to disable satellites. I mean, it's like the idea that, an emerging threat for them to disable satellite. No, it's not emerging at all. So it's like, stop it. They use the scare, as you're pointing out, of a security threat in order to rob you of liberty. And so enough of that. Is it your impression, Bradley Devlin, that Republican lawmakers and their congressional offices are scared of the public noticing this debate and holding them accountable?
Oh, I think so. And I think that's why you've seen a lot of the reporting on this issue kind of be those interbeltway outlets like Punchbowl, like Politico. They don't want this getting out into the public, because if people actually knew the type of abuses, left and right, that happened with FISA, everyone would be enraged. And you see this type of cooperation happening in the Judiciary Committee right now, where Jim Jordan and Jerry Nadler are working together to get this warrant provision added to FISA reauthorization. You see Representative Lofgren, a progressive Democrat from California, working with Representative Davidson, a conservative from Ohio, to make that happen as well. And then you see the proof in the pudding, right? In 2023, a court order found that Americans were spied on using FISA who ended up at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. You saw
sorry, just to be clear, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was used to spy on Americans inside of the United States Capitol on January 6th.
Yes, and all the data collection that went into prosecuting some of those cases by the FBI. The FBI also pulled information from FISA on people who participated in the George Floyd riots. And so once the right and left get word of that in the grassroots, then they're incredibly angry about this type of thing. But until then, that's why I think Jim Jordan's really trying to get out in front of the issue. That's why I think you see a lot of these Freedom Caucus and associated representatives talking about this issue more than they ever have, because this is the first time in a long time, right? I believe it's 5 years that we've had the chance to actually do something about FISA. And what has happened in those 5 years? We've only learned more about the abuses at the highest level, right? FISA wasn't a Section 02 issue with Carter Page, but we saw this all with the Steele dossier and Russiagate and how much FISA played a role in all of that. So this is our best crack at doing something about it, and it would be really shameful, I think, on the speaker's part to not take advantage of this opportunity when it seems like everyone on the right has some leverage here, more leverage than we've ever had in discussing data privacy issues in the past 20 years.
Lastly, Bradley Devlin, also the United States House of Representatives, although nobody brings it up anymore, has impeached the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Now, as we know from the multiple Trump impeachments, there's a whole walk down the hallway ceremony that's supposed to happen with these articles of impeachment. It has not happened yet. There's some conversation about whether it's going to happen the end of this week or maybe the beginning of next. The Senate is already planning on suffocating. They want to smother this thing with a pillow. The Senate Democrats want this thing to go away. What's going to happen there?
Yeah, I'm still waiting on being able to purchase my commemorative pen from the signing of articles of impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas. If you remember, that's what Nancy Pelosi did with the Trump impeachment round one, I believe. Listen, I think the Senate will do all that it can to ignore this issue. I think that Schumer is going to have an ally in Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell has proven time and time again he wants to do nothing to actually secure the southern border. And so, I'm just encouraging members of Congress to continue their oversight efforts. Obviously, they're planning on doing so in April. Last month, they sent 50-plus different subpoenas to the Biden administration and relevant officials to come and testify. It's just taking, a big scythe to everything they can find in the Biden administration and publicizing it as much as possible. So that type of oversight, I think, is welcome, especially in an election year. It's just good politics for Republicans. But in terms of actually making change, obviously that Senate trial is going nowhere. There's no way he's going to be impeached in the first place. I think Schumer will do everything to bury it. And I think that Republicans in the Senate should tell McConnell, hey, that's great that you're stepping down in November, but you need to step down right now, because we have way too much at stake. We have FISA, we have Ukraine aid, we have appropriations that are supposed to start according to statute this month. So we're going to be either getting appropriations done or being in another continuing resolutions.
But Bradley, he can't step down now. He can't step down now. He needs to make Ukraine funding permanent and name a successor who can help undermine Trump if he comes back to office. So, he's got things to do.
Right, exactly. So the Senate conference, by doing nothing, is allowing Mitch McConnell to tie the hands of President Trump if and when President Trump returns to office.
Right.
And so we simply can't afford that. Not even to mention the campaign side of things. Mitch McConnell is still overseeing, the Senate Leadership Fund, and all of his people are overseeing that. And last time in 2022, when the map seemed to work in our favor, well, what did he do? He pulled out all the funding from close races like Blake Masters in Arizona and decided he was going to bet on Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania, who never stood a chance.
Well, I got to say, though, at the rate that John Fetterman's going, we may have elected the more conservative senator there. I have no idea. We'll see.
It's a very interesting commentary when someone recovers from a brain injury and they become more conservative. I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
We'll have you back to talk about that issue and so much more. Bradley Devlin, thank you, from the American Conservative. Good to talk to you today.
Thanks, Vince.
All right. Google searches for the term "my eyes hurt" skyrocketed Monday afternoon as the solar eclipse swept the United States. If If you were Google searching medical advice about why do my eyes hurt because I just stared at the sun, you probably shouldn't be voting. It's a useful sorting mechanism. The great one, Mark Levin, is up next here on the legendary WMAL.